Hello all, thanks for stopping by. I wanted to share more on the restoration of this beautiful Silvertone 4569. In part 1 of the video on veneering, we focused on the removal of the old veneer from the substrate. In addition to the removal of the old veneer from the front substrate, we also cut the left and right front pieces of veneer for reattachment. So with the old veneer removed from the substrate, I needed to do some cleaning on the substrate with the grooves in the center inlay piece. Doing so was straightforward and simple. I used a small file about 1 millimeter in width, which was perfect for the channels or the grooves, and just worked back and forth and cleaned those up. Got rid of some of the old residue that's been there for years. With the grooves cleaned out, the next step in the process for me was to move along and do some sanding on the substrate. So again, what you see me doing here is just kind of moving back and forth, again using around 120 to 150 grit paper or a sanding sponge just to remove some of the residue from the substrate. So the key is, again, don't over sand. Just make sure that you have a porous surface that's still flat with a nice plane for reattachment of the new veneer. With the substrate sanded and cleaned up and ready for the new veneer, the next step is to cut the center inlay pieces of veneer that I did not cover in the first video. As I mentioned earlier when I was talking about my veneering strategy, again I'm using my quarter-sawn veneer to create the inlay pieces. You probably noticed I have the veneer sheet itself on a 45-degree angle. Again, that is done just to mirror the grain lines for the inlay pieces. As I noted in the prior video, be sure your blade, your razor, is extremely sharp. Replace it if needed before you start this process. One thing I failed to mention earlier is be sure your documentation is good and you have photos for all the veneer that you'll be cutting. Again, the idea here is to match the grain lines and the angle, which is 45 degrees, but in addition make sure the length and width is correct for the piece. Again, you see me here scoring the veneer. I talked about the importance of that. Be sure you've got a nice straight line, and again, you're not applying too much pressure. You want to go back and forth and score the veneer until you're through to your cutting mat. On another note, one thing I failed to mention is be sure your second cut of veneer, in this case again I'm trying to match the angles for two pieces of veneer, the smaller width piece and the wider piece. So those pieces are cut adjacent to each other so the grain lines match. Here are a few more photos of me just making the cut. The long length line cuts have been made. Now again I'm just moving along to get the ends, do a little trimming, and we'll have the second piece of inlay veneer ready and complete. Now with the completion of these two pieces of veneer cut, as you see here at the 45-degree angle that we're shooting for, we'll continue the process for the next two pieces. You probably noticed I have the cutting mat inverted. I still have the veneer at a 45-degree angle, but again this is done to create the correct 45-degree angle, the opposite direction for the pieces of inlay veneer that will be on the left side of the radio. With the four pieces of veneer cut, I placed them on the radio cabinet just to get a visual, make sure the grain lines look correct and the cuts were made proper. The next step in the process is to use adhesive, and here you see me using a heat lock product, and again I'm applying the adhesive with a foam brush. It's recommended to use a roller. Again, my surface area for this particular substrate was small, and I elected just to use the foam brush. Again, you don't want to over apply the material. It needs to dry and look somewhat translucent. Once the adhesive is applied to the substrate material, do the same process for the back side of your new veneer. So in this case, about 45 minutes passed, and again you can see the translucent appearance that I referenced earlier that you're shooting for. One thing too I failed to mention, this was a lesson learned from a prior restoration. You need to make sure 100% that your adhesive is dry for using, this product or a similar product on both the substrate and the veneer before allowing the two to come in contact with each other. Otherwise, you'll get instant bonding just like super glue, and you're going to have a big mess on your hands. I've been there, done that. Don't make that same mistake. The next step was for me to take my pre-cut pieces of veneer and place them on the cabinet. Again, I spent considerable time making sure my alignment was spot on. And as you would figure, you get one chance only. You got to get it right. Suspend those extra seconds, minutes, whatever it takes to make sure your alignment's spot on if you're trying to duplicate this effort at home. So with my veneer pieces aligned to the cabinet to my liking, I used my preheated iron, which was on medium to high heat using a cotton cloth. Again, you want to go back and forth, starting in the center, using moderate pressure, working from the center toward the edges. This whole process for me took somewhere maybe 3 to 5 minutes. So here I am just kind of double checking my work just to make sure that the adhesive has done its part and I've applied enough heat and I'm satisfied with the bonding of the material. You probably noticed the 4 pieces of veneer that I used as the inlay were cut long. That was done by design. I actually flipped the cabinet over as depicted here, put it up against my cutting board, and again used my knife and scored the areas and just cut off the excessive material. With these pieces trimmed out, I just flipped the cabinet back over and did a little bit more trimming and just cleaned this up. I'll do a little bit more sanding. Again, this area is not really critical because it'll be covered up by the bezel itself. Next up is drilling the holes for the control stems on the cabinet. Here you see I'm applying some painter's tape. Again, that's to reduce my chances of splintering of the veneer. I have a support board underneath, and here I'm drilling some pilot holes through the center of the existing stem holes in the cabinet. With the pilot holes completed, I continue to drill out the control stem areas on the front. As you can see here depicted, I got some nice clean cut lines and no splintering of the veneer. It really turned out well. And a little cleanup here of the areas with the file. Because of the bad weather conditions, I haven't been able to strip the cabinet. However, I did sneak in a small piece. As depicted here, I did some stripping on the left front side to get some idea of the grain itself in the wood and the color of the existing veneer. With the old lacquer removed, you can see that the original veneer is much darker. My guess is it's probably been stained at some point in time. And it's a lot deeper tone than the veneer that I replaced on the radio. So how do we tackle that? The approach is to take your new veneer and make it match the old veneer. So here are a couple photos that I wanted to share with you guys on that. I took a couple pieces of the new veneer and applied nutmeg gel stain as well as brown mahogany, as you see here. And then tried a mixture of the two, blending those, and it settled on the brown mahogany of choice to match the existing stain. So the bottom side, the new veneer that you see, I'll use the brown mahogany on that at some point to blend it to the top side of the existing veneer. Again, I'll spend more time stripping the cabinet just to make 100% certain that I've got all the tone lacquers off and the colors you see are true. Thanks again for joining me, checking out the restoration and the veneering of this beautiful Silvertone 4569. Again, all my new subscribers out there, appreciate you guys subscribing. Hope you enjoy the videos as well. We'll continue this series as I continue the process over the next week or so. Thank you.